Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Scripps Research Fully Interactive Resources for Students and Teachers, or FIRST. My name is Rosie Alvaran-Seckler, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. If you're joining us for the first time or just not familiar with us, Scripps Research is one of the largest nonprofit private biomedical research institutes in the nation, and our mission is to develop the next generation of medicines and diagnostics to treat the most present health problems or concerns of our time, such as COVID-19. I would like to encourage everybody to visit our website after the webinar and to reach out to us if you have more questions. We hope that you enjoy today's webinar. For today's presentation, we have a panel of 3 graduate students who will be talking about issues of science advocacy, as well as their journey into science and their research work. Before we go into our panel, I want to touch on some housekeeping items. As a reminder, all of your videos have been disabled and you've been muted. The format today will consist of a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session between the moderator and the panelist, followed by another 10 to 15 Q&A session where you can post your questions live. So to do this, I'd like you at this moment to hover over the bottom of your screen. You're gonna see a menu and there's a Q&A button, and you're gonna use this Q&A button to type in your questions at any time. This is the only way that you have to interact with the moderator and the panelists. And again, you can type them at any time, and we encourage you to do so, but we're gonna be answering those on the second half of the presentation. We also want to interact with you, and we're gonna be doing polls throughout the presentation to do this. So I think that at this time, it's a good time to practice, and soon you're gonna see on your screen that there's a set of 2 questions. I'm gonna ask that you take a moment to answer these questions, which are going to inform our panelists on who you are and why you're here today. I'm gonna be sharing the responses with everybody. So I see that most of you are college students. Welcome. And you are here because you want to listen to the scientist stories, you want to get advice for pursuing science and understanding what careers in science are possible. That's great. So without further delay, I'd like to move on to our panelists, Kokila Shankar, Haley Perret, and Corey Booker. Welcome and thank you for being here today with us. And I want to start by asking you to briefly introduce yourself and also talk a little bit about your research. So why don't we do it in this order? Kokila, Haley, and Corey. Kokila, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kokila. I'm a 3rd-year graduate student. I work in Dr. Olivier George's lab at UCSB, where I actually study nicotine addiction and how nicotine addiction affects the body and the brain. It's really interesting work because we know that nicotine plays a huge role in altering our appetites and our body weights, and this can make it difficult for people to quit smoking. So by understanding how nicotine interacts with our body and our brain to regulate metabolism, appetite, and body weight, maybe we can help find some new therapies to help people quit smoking.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Haley and I'm a 1st-year graduate student in Andrew Ward's lab here on our La Jolla, California campus. And I just graduated from Michigan State just over a year ago, where I studied chemical engineering and biochemistry. And now my research focuses on applying structural biology techniques like cryo-electron microscopy and using information we can glean from those techniques to influence and inform vaccine design, which obviously is super important right now. As you've seen, infectious disease research is really, really crucial so we can understand why outbreaks occur and also how to handle them and how to develop the therapeutics and vaccines that'll keep us safe.
Great, thank you. Corey?
Hi, I'm Corey. I'm a 6th-year grad student in the Florida campus of Scripps. I work in Dr. Don Finney's lab, and our lab is focused on studying adult stem cells. And in particular, my thesis work regards the study of adult stem cells that live in the bone marrow. You may not know this, but when we undergo periods of prolonged lack of weight-bearing activity, This can look like bed rest or recovering from a surgery or limb immobilization due to an injury. And it can also happen with astronauts that go into space. They're not experiencing gravity. So during these periods where we're not using our skeleton, your bones become thinner and weaker. And so my project is mostly focused on understanding the role, how the stem cells in the bone marrow that make new bone are reacting to this and how they may be contributing to this bone loss and bone weakening. The idea being if we can get more information about how the stem cells are responding and if they're even able to make new bone during these times, maybe we're that much closer to developing a therapeutic to help people recover when they lose bone in this manner, or to help prevent it altogether. And it may provide some insight too into age-related bone loss like osteoporosis.
Great. Thank you for that brief introduction of yourself. Before moving into our discussion today, I want to let the audience know that you can always ask questions about research and about how to get involved in science, in research. How was it for our panelists, what to get involved in their first place, maybe when they were in high school or in college. Every week we pick a different topic. It's really to drive our discussion, but all of these questions are allowed, and I'm sure the panelists are happy to answer them. Plus, the different stories every week might bring insight into the many ways that there is out there for you guys personally to join research if you're interested in science. So as you know, the topic today is science advocacy. And while I was doing some research on this topic, trying to figure out a simple definition for it, I really couldn't find one. And it's because, it depends who you ask and what they do, how they will respond to this question. So I guess to simplify a little bit, I came up with the definition of it's science for policy and policy for science. And for example, science for policy, I think these times give a great example. For example, the scientific data is informing some of the public health regulations that we are adhering to, like the CDC guidelines for isolation right now, social isolation. And policy for science, I went a little bit far back, like 30 years ago, to the Human Genome Project, where a lot of scientists and lawmakers came together for this breakthrough project to sequence the 3.2 billion base pairs of the human genome. So those are my examples out there. And now I'm gonna ask our panelists to go in the same order and to discuss what they think of science advocacy, or what the definition is for them. So Kokila, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I'd first just love to say that I really love that small phrase like science for policy and policy for science. I think that's a great little message to keep in mind. So just to kind of elaborate on that, to me, science advocacy is also about raising awareness and understanding of science to the public, whether that be at the policymaking level or just at the normal day-to-day level for most people in their social circles. Really just helping to make us understand what science is, how science works, what it can be used for, is super helpful for really anybody at any level.
Great.
Yeah, I think Rosie and Kokila have mentioned some really awesome points. And I think I would even extend the definition for science advocacy a little further. And it's because I'm a little biased, because this is what I'm involved in, but I think it's really important to advocate for the next generation of scientists, particularly for groups of people that are underrepresented in the sciences. So encouraging them and offering opportunities for them to get involved in the STEM fields is something that I think is really, really crucial.
Great. Corey?
I'm on board with all of that. I think you guys covered the bases. I feel like that's kind of, in my definition, the four main levels is, the higher up policy stuff and how it affects science and science can affect it, and then sharing with the public, and then advocating with the younger generation. And I think that's all what I think of when I think science advocacy.
Great. So Haley, what do you, I know that you're very invested in communicating science to the public, and I think that you do outreach, how we call it. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that aspect of science advocacy?
Yeah, sure. So I did just start out at Scripps, so I'm trying to get as involved as possible. But I think that the most I've done with science outreach was in my time during undergrad. I helped put together a lot of different events for K through 12 outreach for the group Women in Engineering, which I think was really, really helpful. And in doing so, we were kind of able to show, in our case, younger girls, that they could grow up and become engineers, even though they're, really underrepresented in that field. But I also was able to develop a lot of skills that I think are important for general science advocacy. So being able to communicate to people that aren't at the same technical level as I might be, and understanding what resonates with them and what's important to them, to try and get them excited about, what we love to do. And I think there's a lot of opportunities like that, whether it be in high school or in college. I mean, there's science festivals and different diversity groups like I was involved with. So if you guys are interested, I definitely just try and go out and find those programs and get involved, because it is incredibly rewarding.
Great, thank you. So Corey, I know that you're interested in science policy, even maybe your next step after you finish your PhD. This is the career that you might select. And you're very invested in supporting science also from the funding perspective. So do you want to tell our college students today in the audience a little bit about how research is funded? Sometimes the public doesn't know much about this.
Yeah, definitely. I can talk a lot about that. It's definitely a huge part of how policy affects science is, you need money to make science happen. And I think to start, I think a lot of people don't realize how expensive it is. Even just down to the simplest instruments that we use to conduct science can be quite expensive. So that means, and that's in addition to paying scientists and, making sure that they can earn a living wage and all of that. So it's really important that funding is there in order for good work to be done to help our society. So there's all different types of research organizations, but mostly I'll be talking about universities and research institutes like what Scripps is, and leaving out maybe science for business, because that's sort of a different area. Larger research universities, like a four-year university, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of them will have endowments, which are sort of like large savings accounts that they have either from alumni funds or from students' tuition, and maybe some help from the government. They'll have these huge endowments that they can use to help fund research internally. And then there's also grants that scientists can apply for on every level. So students can apply for fellowships, or professors can apply for grants to fund whole labs. And these would be with organizations like the National Institute of Health, the NIH, the National Science Foundation, maybe the Department of Defense. There's all different government organizations that give out grants to deserving applicants in order for them to conduct the research that they've proposed. And so these are really important, especially for Scripps research to be conducted. We rely really heavily on grant funding. There's also maybe private donors, like certain foundations or very wealthy individuals may give to fund a certain fellowship program or a lab, or even contribute to a university's endowment. But in particular, I think the policy and some of the advocacy comes in determining the budgets for those government organizations that give out grants, like the NIH. And I think a really key example that I think of is, like, within my lifetime, the Congress decided to really prioritize HIV research, which is great. I mean, it's a great cause. And so that meant that they heightened the NIH budget for HIV research, meaning that that field really grew, and a lot of amazing work has been done in the couple of decades since that decision followed. And sort of on the converse, there was a point maybe 20 years ago where the Congress decided, and the other branches of government decided to kind of deprioritize stem cell research. And so that area of research really slowed because there was less money coming in to fund it. And so I think that's just a really key example of how these decisions way up, it feels so lofty at the top, can really affect how science is conducted and what the outcome is. So hopefully that's maybe a little more helpful in defining where funding comes from and what that means, and how advocacy maybe can play a role in influencing those policy decisions.
Thank you, Corey. Those were very good examples, and it puts the topic in context. So Kokila, let's say that some of our students out there, they are really not only passionate about science, but they also passionate about advocating for science. So what would be your advice? And then after Kokila, any of you can jump in, Haley or Corey, to tell your advice to the students how to get involved.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, and something that I'm really passionate about. Getting involved with science advocacy is really easy because, as I said earlier, science advocacy is not necessarily, in my mind, just the policy aspect of science that the government conducts, but also what happens in our day-to-day lives. And something that I know we've probably seen a lot of in the past few years as social media has become really important is how there's a lot of science that gets shared on social media right now. And oftentimes you'll read a news article that has a really great title, but maybe that news article was taken from a scientific study that the results didn't quite show what the title of the article shows. And so that's something that is a really simple thing that can become snowballed over time, and we can see a lot of maybe either positive or often negative effects of that just in our own internet circles. So to me, becoming a science advocacy person, you can go on social media, fact check those news articles. If people that you know are sharing things that don't seem scientifically right, it's really easy to show them some better research or some more reputable sources to kind of help ensure that science is moving forward properly and responsibly. Another thing that I always say that you can do is a lot of policy decisions are actually really important at the local government level. So for you, like if you are noticing that some policy decisions related to science or research-based evidence are happening in your local or state governments, talking to your representatives can be a really good way to also push and advocate for science.
Haley or Corey, do you want to add to that?
Sure, I can build off of that. I think if you are interested in getting involved in advocacy, I think there are likely, I'm not really sure, I don't know what area everybody is living in or what opportunities are available for high school or college, but I'm sure that there are internships that are available that may kind of get you involved in that. But you can also create your own opportunities to get involved in advocacy. Something easy like Kokila shared is, fact checking things on social media, maybe like letting your great aunt Susan know that that article is like totally off base in a nice, gentle way. But you can also, before you have your degree, maybe you don't have the credentials to like speak on something, but you can boost the opinion of someone who is a scientist or has those credentials that you trust and help their message spread further on social media. Maybe on your Instagram, you once a week or once a month highlight a woman in science who's doing really important work or something like that. Those are really easy ways to advocate for science and educate your friends and family. And anyone who may follow you. But you can also create your own opportunities. Maybe you can create a science advocacy club at your school and get a teacher to help sponsor you and connect you with local people in your area who can, there's all kinds of things you can do. And I don't think you have to wait to get involved in. So they can range from taking 5 minutes a day to maybe being a little more involved. And either way, like with starting a club, just by doing that, you're like working on the skills that are required to be a leader and to learn so much about what it means to advocate, because you're like stepping out there and starting your own thing. So yeah, I think just taking the time to do it at all and maybe creating your own opportunities, that would be my advice for advocating.
Yeah. I think both of you guys have touched on a really really, really awesome points, Kokila. I love your social media example. I think it's great and not done enough. But I think that maybe opportunities might be hard to identify sometimes, and certain schools might have some, certain ones might not. I'd also like to say that a lot of universities have science-based magazines or other type of publications which you can get involved with, and that will help your science communication skills. But pursuing anything that might help you build the interpersonal skills that are required to be a really great science advocate, I think is key. And there's a lot of technical writing courses you can take, or participating in Model UN or something where you're building your perspective of the world and trying to understand how science fits in with everything else, and how changing science or advocating for certain science policies might have an effect on different spaces, I think is key. So even if it might not be directly applied to your particular flavor of science advocacy, I think anything you can do to develop these skills is crucial and awesome and will help you in your career.
Right. Thank you for that great advice. Yeah, it's that's exactly, I think that's exactly what the students should get involved in if they want to pursue this career, or even if they want to combine both, science and advocacy. Plus, they sometimes they focus too much on the science courses. And Haley, you brought a great point, what other skills are important, communication skills, either like by practicing or taking a class. So that those are great advice. I guess that you guys talked about cross-checking, the information that maybe you see in a headline. So before moving into the questions from the students, I wanted to touch base on how scientists publish their work. Maybe the students joining us today, they don't know all the different ways to find scientific facts. So do you want to say something about this? Maybe Kokila, you can start.
Yeah, sure. So scientists have a lot of different ways that they share the information that they collect. And I want to first kind of emphasize one of the points that Corey made earlier, where a lot of scientific funding comes from government institutes like the NIH. And what that really means is that the government money that is sponsoring the science actually comes from the public, right? It comes from taxpayer dollars and other public fund collecting. And so to me, what that means is scientists really do have a responsibility to share their science with the public in whatever way they can. The primary way that scientists share their work is through peer-reviewed research articles. So there are lots of different scientific journals that share research reports similar to like lab reports you would write in high school or college that summarize the findings of the studies they have done, what those findings really mean, how it was done, all the details. The problem with that, to me though, is that a lot of those peer-reviewed research articles, unless you're a scientist in that field, it's really hard to understand what they're actually talking about. And you may not know, just either as a general person or even a scientist in a different field, what does that result really mean? And so some other ways that scientists can share their information are through, if you're at a university, a communications office or a press office, where they distill that research report down into a more manageable journalism style article, or some scientists even directly communicate with the public through different Q&A forums, kind of like this, or maybe some other opportunities where they get to more directly interact with people.
That's great. Anybody else wants to add something?
I guess I want to add, so that's about how scientists share their finding with the public, but just as a member of the public who may not be up on the jargon, I think it was great advice that Kokila shared to maybe take a look at your own university's publications and that sort of thing. But I have had great experience, like when I was growing up in junior high, high school, popular science magazines tend to be great resources too that distill some of the information down, and they're in print, they're easy to read, and they can be a great resource just to see like what is being done, and they don't really put a huge spin on it. And from my opinion, even still, as I've moved through the science world, they still are like pretty reputable, and they don't overblow a lot of the research. They put it into like a great context. And in addition to that, a lot of the really reputable science journals that like we scientists read internally, a lot of them, for some of the big articles that get published, they will also publish like smaller summary articles that kind of read a little more like a popular science article. It's distilled down, it kind of removes some of the jargon and maybe puts it into like a framework that helps you understand a little better what the findings. So I think those are really great resources too, if you can get your hands on them. I don't think they're very, so I would definitely recommend those to kind of cut through the technical stuff that maybe you don't really have a framework for. Is a great way to understand the ongoing work.
Yeah,
Great,
definitely.
great advice. And I want to add on what Kokila said, that there are more of these internships in that they bring together science and communications. Even at Scripps Research, we'll see a few of these internship opportunities in the future. So I would encourage the students to look at their local universities if they want to explore this area. So at this point, I want for everybody, to remind everybody to type in your questions, because I haven't seen any questions coming in. I think that while we do that, maybe we can do our second poll just to gauge how we're doing and to let our panelists know a little bit more of what you want to hear. And I see a few questions are coming in. Okay, so the poll is now on your screen. Please take a moment to take it, and I'll be sharing the responses with everybody. Would like to know what you're enjoying the most so far and what you would like to hear more about. I see that many are enjoying your stories, your advice. They would like to know more about skills needed to become a science advocate. And they would like to know a little bit how it feels to be a scientist and how to pursue a science or advocacy career. So I think that with this information, we can move forward. So the first question that came in, I'm going to read it. How can I improve my science communication skills? I may not be able to attend more schooling to do so. So maybe people who are graduating. Who would like to take this question?
I can start it off. That's a really wonderful question. And there are so many ways to improve science communication at almost any level. So a personal story that I had, something that I remember as helping me become better at communicating science, was that in high school, kind of like it was mentioned about the popular science articles and magazines kind of distilling science, we were encouraged to find popular science articles or maybe more easy to understand scientific research stories and summarize them in our own words, like actually understand how to write about the science and communicate it in ways that made sense to not just you, but maybe to your parents or your siblings or your friends. So that's something that's really easy. All you need is the internet to look up some science and write about it on your own. Another sort of personal way that I found to help me communicate science was, let's say you were studying for a class at school, like a biology or chemistry class, learning the subject matter well enough to be able to teach it to somebody who has no idea what you're talking about, whether that person is in your class or not. That was something that helped me really understand what it takes to be able to distill important information into a basic way. And I think just anything that really helps you kind of improve your ability to think and write and read and speak about science. I'm touching the top of the iceberg here. There's so many more ways that I'm sure the other panelists can jump in on. Those are two things that really help me personally.
Yeah, I'd like to go off of what you said, Kokila, with explaining things to people who may not know. I found that it's a lot of fun because you get to teach people and it's really exciting. But yeah, it is a great way to kind of synthesize the information that you're learning to put it into your own words. And then they're also getting new information. And that's a great thing to do. And then I think just to build on that, if you can get involved in science outreach, maybe going to like local middle schools or junior highs or high schools and speaking with students there, or some other outreach with science type thing, that's a great way to like not only be building those skills, but then also be advocating for science while you're learning. And so you're going to be benefiting, it'll be mutually beneficial. And so I think that that's a great way to, I don't know, get that time in and have it count twice. And definitely a lot, and that'll help your vocabulary and help you understand the way other people explain things. Reading, I've heard, is a great, and I know to be a great way to improve your communication skills because you're taking in all those new ideas.
Haley, you want to say something? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So I used to teach science writing actually in undergrad. And I think the fact that you guys are here and trying to learn about this is half the battle, because a lot of times people that study STEM don't realize how important communication is. So props to you for that. But what I found really helped my students is having them practice writing to different audiences, which I think kind of was touched on by both Kokila and Corey. And really empathizing with who you think you'll be talking to and understanding their perspective and what they know and what they might need explained more is really, really helpful practice. But additionally, I'd argue that to improve your science communication skills, don't be afraid to make it multimodal and pursue, you know, visual ways to communicate and things like that, that kind of encompass more learners as well and help you think about things in a slightly different perspective.
Great.
I love that.
There's a question here that I think is great. And as you know, most of the students today are college students. And so this question says, when picking your program for grad school, did you look for labs that allow you to do outreach, or did you try to fit outreach communication on your own time? So maybe you picked the lab because of the research, regardless of discussing outreach opportunities with your advisor before joining. Who would like to start this conversation?
I can. I know for me, outreach and science advocacy wasn't, and you know, some of the policy stuff that I've become interested in wasn't on my radar personally when I was selecting a program or a lab. But I am very fortunate that the PI that I chose is someone who values balance and values a little bit of exploration and, you know, other career paths and stuff like that. So if that is something you're doing, I definitely would weight that in your decision. I just personally got kind of lucky that I landed in a lab where I am allowed to maybe spend a little more time thinking about those other avenues for my career. But yeah, I would say if it's something that's a big priority to you, then it should be high on the list in criteria and selecting a lab and an institute or university.
Yeah, it's actually really funny. On the kind of opposite side, I actually did pick my lab because I knew I wanted to do more outreach communication, like do all that kind of stuff. My current professor, he loves to do outreach, loves to communicate to a lot of audiences. When I did my rotation in his lab, I learned that he did an AMA on Reddit a couple years before I came to the lab. So I was like, whoa, okay, that's pretty cool. If, you know, my professor can go on Reddit and talk to complete strangers about science at a pretty basic level, that's definitely the kind of person that I want to work for. So reiterating 100% what Corey said, if you want to do that, there are so many professors, especially now that more people are realizing the importance of science communication and advocacy, that really try to make that part of their training experience for their students. So it's if you're thinking about going to grad school, but you still want to keep up all these other outlets, it's a good conversation to have.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys have said. And I chose a lab primarily for the research, but my PI is really supportive. And I've actually been able to identify opportunities that involve like scientific art. So I'm a painter and I do some graphic design work as well. So I'm actually helping some of the creative people at Scripps with some of their coronavirus communications. And I think that even identifying opportunities like that, where maybe you are making your own time to do it, but if I get home after a long day, like I still want to do stuff like that, and it's still being super productive, and I'm doing science outreach, but it's something that's calming and really fulfilling for me. So if you have a talent or a skill like that, I'm sure there's ways you can apply it as long as you're looking and really trying to prioritize it.
Great. I want to let all the attendees know that you can post your questions anonymously. Sometimes these promotes more questions coming in. So yeah, I wanted to pause for a second and say that. I think there's a question here from an educator. They want to know what types of content they can use to promote science literacy in their classroom. Who would like to?
Yeah, so I have a game I used to play with my students that I thought was really interesting. And I would find a really ridiculous article that the prose was very nice. So you would think at first glance that it was a really great science article. And then you read more and you notice all these issues. And I would give them time to sit and think about this article and read it and discuss it with each other. And most of the time, a lot of people get blinded by the nice prose and they don't realize the issues. And I'd slowly start talking to them about it and talking them through it and just watching their faces change. And I think after that, with our classroom discussions, we noticed that they were paying a little bit more attention and being a little bit more critical of what they were reading. And I think it's a really awesome activity you can do pretty easily with your students.
Great.
That's super fantastic. I mean, there's something that kind of makes you think based on that is that we as humans just have so much unconscious bias in everything that we do. And science is like the complete opposite of that, right? It's unbiased. It's always question driven, like it's evidence driven. And so I think something like that, where especially tying it back to like grassroots advocacy, where you might be drawn in by people sharing information and they have similar backgrounds as you, or they write really nicely, or they can make convincing arguments, but they're not evidence-based or true arguments all the time. I think that's a really awesome thing to do, especially in a classroom setting where you can all discuss it.
Yeah, those are very good ideas. So there are two questions here, I guess, like without endorsing anybody %, they want to know if there are any science magazines or specific San Diego groups that would help promoting science literacy and advocacy.
I think I'm confused. Like to read their materials or to get involved with.
What will be like magazines will be to read their materials. You know how you were saying before, some magazines. Yeah. And well, we can point them to Scripps Research, right? News and views for Scripps Research, it's open to the public. But I guess if you can name one or two magazines, and I guess we're not endorsing them. And also they were talking about local San Diego groups. I guess this person is based in San Diego to promote science advocacy.
Yeah, so
the magazines. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I was just going to say, being in San Diego, they're one of the associations that I can think of that's more along the lines of like science literacy and communication is called NeurWrite. I can post the link later in our content, but it's like a neuroscience-based group, and so they welcome like their open source like local submissions if you have like research articles or opinion pieces and things like that. So that might be a good outlet if you're in San Diego. I think it is more tailored to neuroscience, but it'd be a good place to start.
Corey?
Oh, I was just gonna say, not endorsing, but just some of my personal favorites, I guess, for popular science is Discover magazine. I grew up reading that. It was one of the first, science, real science things I was able to get my hands on, and I think that their articles still are pretty solid and a good jumping off point for understanding current research. I believe like National Geographic and Scientific American are similar caliber. There are like blogs and stuff online. You just really got to be careful because sometimes they're maybe not so reputable, but if there's one that is run by a scientist, there's lots of things like that too. You just kind of have to poke around. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know that there are a lot, and there are a lot too that discuss ongoing private research. So like research industry businesses that are conducting research outside of universities. And there's a lot of blogs too that are discussing that work, which wouldn't necessarily be published online, and those can be fun too. And a lot of that is happening in the Southern California area as a big hub for industry research. So that might be something too.
Haley, do you have any personal favorite or?
I know I grew up reading Scientific American, but I'll be honest, I've transitioned away from that a bit.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we have two more questions here. I think we can fit them into the time. So the first one says, I have done a lot of outreach as an undergraduate and I want to switch my career path into education, but at a level where I can advocate for positive science education. Do you have advice for how I can transition into an educator?
So I guess that this would depend on what you define as an educator, if you want to be a high school or middle school teacher, or if you just want to be someone that's really advocating for science. And I think there's, it's different things that go into actually becoming a formal educator. But if you're not interested in that route, I think there's a lot of opportunities where you can participate on these or in these outreach groups or help lead some of these campaigns and these associations and different things like that. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's good. I would add, you're totally right. If you don't want to be a teacher per se, what they call formal education, then you can go into museums, there are internships for what they call informal education. And I'm not sure exactly at what stage this person is, but there's some master programs out there in 1 or 2 years that you can get a master's certificate in science education and go into informal science education, which is actually exploding right now. Kokila or Corey, you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I can add, maybe look into like local professional societies, things like the Association for Women in Science or other either scientific organizations or maybe even more policy or advocacy type organizations or education groups. I mean, as you mentioned, Rosie, there's so much informal science education it's got a big boom right now. And so a lot of these different groups are hosting educational events, promoting science education, working even at the policy level at groups like AWIS or AAAS to help influence all these decisions. So wherever you are in the country, that could potentially be another outlet.
Yeah, I agree. Societies have many different opportunities and at different levels, either if you just graduated from college or even doing your PhD and finishing up your PhD, you can get an internship at a society level. So I guess the last question here is, do you use your research topic as content for how to communicate science to different groups, or you look for something separate?
Okay, I can start. That's a great question. So I know at Scripps, we have like a communications and outreach office, and so they sort of handle the more like high level like public communication. Obviously, like we talk with our families and friends about what we're working on. I've definitely seen people post links to their papers once they are published on those science journals that we were talking about earlier. You can post links to those things and say, hey, go check out my paper. But I think overall, like I kind of refrain from sharing too much about my unpublished work with like the broad general public, just because it's not done yet. And I guess I feel a little private about like what an incomplete product, I suppose. And I don't know that, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know that Scripps would be like super keen on us sharing that. I don't know if that answers the question.
That's good. Anybody else wants to add something? No? That's okay. Maybe we can go ahead and you can give your final remarks, like what will be like a take-home message. And after that, we'll be doing the third poll. Just wanted to let attendees know that after that, we'll have a poll and then a survey. So if you can stick around for this, we will only be a few more minutes. So Kokila, do you want to start with like final remarks?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the biggest take-home message to anyone would be that at the end of the day, science advocacy just means supporting science and supporting the scientists that do science. And there's so many different ways to touch upon that whatever way you find meaningful or easy to do in your own life is going to help science advocacy no matter what.
Great. Haley?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. There's so many avenues to really use your unique skill sets that you've developed over the years in science advocacy. And like with anything else, you're going to meet with some resistance and maybe have some trouble developing certain skills. But I just like to remind people that it is just a skill. And if you work at it and try and seek these opportunities, you can really make a positive impact on the community.
Awesome. Thanks. Corey?
I think Haley said it earlier, and I couldn't agree more that just by being here today and listening in, you're already on the right path. If science advocacy is something that you care about and a career in science, you're already 10 steps ahead of, I know where I was when I was in your shoes as like a college student. So I think just stay on that path, and yeah, like Haley said, it may be difficult at times or maybe met with resistance, but it's a worthy cause too. Like if there's anything worth failing at, it would be this, I think. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So again, I want to thank our panelists for a great discussion and for your time. And at this point, we'd like to get a little bit sense of from the attendees of how we did. So you're going to see a third poll on your screen, and please take a moment to answer this poll. I hope that you like the discussion today. Meanwhile, I can tell you that we're gonna have a science explanation or a demo on Thursday at the same time to talk a little bit about ribosomes and research that grad student Melissa Parker does on ribosomes and how it affects health and disease. And next week, we have another panel on issues of women in science and a chemistry demo that next Thursday on chromatography. So I hope that you can join us for future webinars. And after the poll, there's gonna be a survey. After we've closed this call, there's gonna be a survey. We ask that you please answer that survey. You can provide other topics you'd like to learn about in future webinars. And you're going to be redirected to our webpage where you can find more resources for teaching and also to learn about what is coming up on our webinars. So again, I'm going to give a few more minutes for everybody to respond. Not everybody has logged in their answers. And then with that, I'd like to finalize this, and thank you again for joining. I'll see you next time. Thank you.